When Doves Cry, Prince's very first number one Hot 100 single in the US. The song with the guitar intro that no one can replicate. Famous for its lack of bass line and the biggest hit of 1984, is the song we'll be talking about on this episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. Back again to chat with me about the song's lyrics is Zachary Hoskins. Welcome back, Zach.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to preface this episode by mentioning how important this song was, but I kind of did, I mean, it's
right.
a song, absolutely. Yeah. It has so much value in Prince's discography for so many different reasons, and it's kind of one of those songs that everybody knows, and even knows some of the weird aspects about it, like the lack of bass line. I mean, that's not something that a casual fan might know of other songs in his discography, but if there's one little tidbit of trivia they might know about a song of his, it might be that,
Yeah, right. And this may, Purple Rain, I guess, would be the other one that maybe there's one song that people who don't consider themselves Prince fans know. But I feel like When Doves Cry may even be more I definitely, when I was growing up, I heard When Doves Cry a lot more than I heard Purple Rain. So this is the one this is the one big Prince hit, I think, of head and shoulders above all the rest.
Yeah, I mean, no question. I mean, it literally was the number one song, the best-selling song, the most popular song of the entire year 1984. Not just the summer or for a month or whatever, for the entire calendar year. This was the song that stood head and shoulders above all the rest. And there was a lot of really great songs, iconic songs that came out in 1984 that were big hits. And this one stands above them in terms of its chart position and sales. So it was big. It's huge.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I know, like you always say, this is a lyrics podcast, and ultimately we're going to spend more of our time discussing the lyrics, but this is such an odd song. It's there's not just the lack of bass, but you already mentioned the guitar intro. It has this crazy, a guitar solo that wouldn't sound out of place on a Van Halen record, mm-hmm. and then going into this synth pop, that wouldn't sound out of place on a Human League record. And then, you have Prince's vocals are bringing this kind of R&B dimension to it. It's just this beautiful mutant with all of these different influences coming together in a way that I think if you were a record executive in 1984, or if you were a radio programmer in 1984, you would not necessarily listen to this and say, oh yes, this is going to be the biggest hit of the year. It's so cutting edge and so unlike anything else that it's easy to it's easy to look back on When Doves Cry and be like, well, of course, this is Prince's big pop hit, but it is such an odd song, just sonically, and it still just sounds different from anything else that Prince did before this, and from certainly from anything else that anyone else was doing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I do have very, very distinct memories of hearing the song on the radio the first time. I was fortunate enough to be old enough that I could remember the first time I heard this song. And I knew Prince from Little Red Corvette, 1999. But, he's just another pop artist to me at the time. I didn't really think much of it other than I liked those songs, but never really gave him or, his band much of a second thought. And then this song just came on the radio, and I was in my car, or I was in my parents' car. I wasn't driving. I was 9. I was in the car with my family, and we were driving around, and I heard it, and I kind of nudged my sister. I said, who is this? And she's like, oh, this is the new song by Prince. And I was like, what the hell is going on in this song? I was just kind of floored, I guess. I mean, I was really, it struck me as so odd, like you already mentioned. Everything about it just was so cutting, like you said, cutting edge. It was very avant-garde sounding. Not that I even knew what that was at the time. Right. All I knew was it didn't sound like anything else. And I was transfixed for sure by the opening guitar riff that you don't really ever hear again. Like a lot of times good songs can open up with a cool guitar riff, but they'll repeat that later. Like it'll show back up in like a guitar solo later or as part of the riff that permeates the entire track, but you never hear that again. He does that and then it's gone, and you don't get that guitar sound again. And there's a guitar solo, but it doesn't sound like this. And then like he has these like this vocal loop, at the very beginning that's really weird sounding. It's like a sample of himself making some really guttural noises with his vocals, or else it's highly manipulated voice, which could be as well. And it's just all very odd. And then, of course, you get the chorus, which we'll get to. But the chorus, this is what it sounds like when doves cry, just, begs questions. I mean, nobody really knows, or at least at that time, it was very difficult to understand what that really meant because there was no context of the film yet because it was released ahead of the film.
Right.
So you just kind of were left with this song that was very, it asked a lot more questions than it answered. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And so it was super memorable, and I will always remember that song first time I heard it, which is pretty rare because I don't have too many other instances where I could say I remember the first time I heard song X or song Y, but I do have that with this one.
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing that's kind of interesting about this song is that it was the last one written for the film, right? So it was kind of like commissioned by the filmmakers to Prince, like we need another song to soundtrack to the scene where you're kind of pondering life and pondering your relationship difficulties with Apollonia and your parents, and it's going to be like a montage scene. We need music to go over this. What can you give us? Okay, sure, I can do this. and here we have like one of the biggest songs that he ever created based off of this. I mean, it wasn't even something that was part of the original vision for the album until March of 1984, which is crazy because that's like 3 months before it was released as a single.
Right, and he was already, I feel like he was already halfway through recording his next album by the time he got to this. Yeah, it's crazy. That's a great point. It's crazy to think that we could have had Purple Rain without When Doves Cry. Like that was a perfectly, with that almost happened. There was almost, that album would have existed without this song, which, from today's perspective, it's unimaginable almost.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a really cool kind of footnote about Purple Rain in the album, that its most iconic song, or at least depending on who you ask, its most iconic song. Some people would say it's Purple Rain now here in the 21st century, but at the time, it was in the 80s, it was his most iconic song, I think.
Right.
And the fact that, like you said, it almost didn't make the album at all because it was not intended for that. It was just done as a kind of like I said, commissioned him to quickly pump out another song with no expectations. It didn't even need to be anything all that important or serious. It just needed to fit the tone of the film, which it very clearly does. It has a lot of references to like plot points in the song, and as we start going through the lyrics, that's kind of what I've been doing a lot for these Purple Rain episodes, is trying to provide context of the lyrics to the film, because I think a lot of that, even if it wasn't intentional, everybody's going to do it. Everybody's going to make connections to the movie because it's forever tied with this film, and every single song on the soundtrack had a place in the movie, which isn't always the case with soundtracks, right? I mean, sometimes movie soundtracks incorporate songs that are found in the film, but sometimes they're just like inspired by,
Right, yeah.
And we've seen that, but that's not the case with Purple Rain. All 9 songs, every single one of them is played at some point in the film, either as the revolution on stage, or in the case of Take Me With You and When Doves Cry, as like montage or scene fillers. So yeah, it's a great song, and I don't know. I mean, as far as like its significance pop culturally, it was huge that year, but it influenced, I think, a lot of artists moving forward, and we definitely know that it was sampled by MC Hammer,
Right,
bare
yeah.
minimally, for the song
Perhaps,
Pray. I mean,
perhaps its greatest accomplishment.
you got to pray just to make it today.
Yeah.
Well, what from a pop cultural importance standpoint, Zach, do you note anything else as far as like who this could have influenced, or any other artists or musicians that this song kind of influenced?
Well, I mean, I guess I was thinking about it. I was listening to this song in my car on the way, driving back home to get ready to record this podcast. And it struck me that, like I think a lot of Prince music, this is assembling a lot of different styles into one, into a combination. It's familiar ingredients, but the combination is something that feels new. Like I mentioned earlier, it has that very like 80s kind of metal Eddie Van Halen style shredding, on both the beginning guitar riff and then later for the solo. The chorus, the very famous hook, the little doot 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 doot, like that's definitely, again, I could hear the Human League doing that. I could hear, like any number of sort of like new wave, new romantic type bands. Mm-hmm. And so you can hear his influences coming into it, but then coming out, it's like this combination just feels indelibly like Prince. And I think that this was a period when what we think of today as like 80s music, MTV music, that first generation of MTV was really kind of coalescing, and things that used to be maybe on the fringe, like hard rock, like new wave and punk, are becoming like, now this is just pop music, and so it's a case of music that was, maybe on the edge, like we talked about, maybe a little avant-garde. Now it's becoming the center, and you can hear, very quickly in the next couple of years, like this is sort of, I would argue, When Doves Cry is still much more kind of creative and bold than a lot of what we would hear on MTV. But this sort of like same year as When Doves Cry comes out, Bruce Springsteen is using synthesizers. It's becoming mainstream music. And I think, it's interesting, when I was driving here, I was listening on Spotify, and when you just listen to one track on Spotify, it starts playing, radio based on that track after it's done. And it was really interesting to hear like what the algorithm picked to follow up When Doves Cry, because it immediately started playing Pink Houses by John Mellencamp, which is not what I would have thought to play after When Doves Cry, so I skipped that, and then it starts playing Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads, and so it's like you're like, this is interesting, because it's almost like When Doves Cry sort of is like sitting at the intersection of John Mellencamp and Talking Heads and Van Halen and all of these different artists, it's starting to become this like, it's turning this very heterogeneous blend of influences into this kind of homogenous sound. And I mean that not homogenous usually has negative connotations, but it's smoothing over these influences into something that is just, this is what Prince sounds like, and that became one of the kind of dominant sounds of the 80s.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. I think, I mean, the other thing about When Doves Cry, it's like, I asked this question to myself, like, is this song funky?
Right.
Like, I don't know if it is, I mean, some of the tropes that you're so used to with like a funk song that Prince was heavily into, like a bass line is really kind of important in funk music. And
right.
Lack of bass line. I mean, if you're into Prince because you loved his funk jams, you might not dig When Doves Cry. That might not be your jam, It might be just a little too out there.
Yeah. I think it's funky in the way that, like, again, Talking Heads was funky, although even Talking Heads had a Tina Weymouth was, or very funky bass player. So it may even be a little less funky than Talking Heads.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like, I love this song immensely. It might be my favorite Prince song of all time, but I know plenty of people who don't really like this song that much.
Right.
And I think it's because it sounds it's just not the Prince that they prefer, you know, and they have certain style of Prince that they really like better, and this doesn't really fit in with that, nor does it really fit in with much else. If I'm just trying to think, like, and like your example of Spotify playlist, like it tries to find similar artists or similar sounds, it's difficult to even do that in Prince's catalog. Like, if you were just limited to Prince's catalog, what else would you play in a similar vein of When Doves Cry? Yeah, you could probably pull a few things that come close, but there's not a ton. There's not a ton, because he was really doing more funk-related music early in his career, in disco-y and dance music, and then after that, you know, I guess you could pick maybe one of his more rock songs, I guess, to try to fit in with that category, like maybe something like The Cross, or I don't know, I mean, something off of Around the World in a Day that was a little psychedelic or trippy. Mm. And sure, that might fit in, but even in Prince's music, I think this song stands out as an outlier.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, I mean, like earlier I said that this is like this is Prince's, you know, this is the essence of Prince's sound, and I think that like both things are weirdly kind of true. You know, because on the one hand, when you hear this, you know, you hear the treated, you know, Lynn LM1, and you hear the you know, the synthesizer patches, and it's like, this sounds like Prince, you know, this sounds like canonical classic Prince. But on the other hand, like you point out, there aren't a lot of other songs in his catalog that you can really point to other than just generally like they both sound like Prince. This is also an outlier in a lot of ways. It's doing different things even than the songs on the other songs on Purple Rain.
Yeah. And just like any good Prince song, music and lyrics combine to really make a song memorable. So we've talked a bit about, you know, its place in Prince's discography and history, and a lot of that has to do with how it sounds. But the lyrics are a very important part too. And I think because of the popularity of this song, these lyrics are pretty iconic as far as like people knowing them, can sing them by, you know, word by word.
Right.
And there isn't a lot of confusion as to what the lyrics are, but there may be some, as far as what he's trying to say and convey with these lyrics is probably where there's, I would guess, the most confusion, or maybe the most different opinions about it. So, I mean, the lyrics are really important in the song, and I think it's time to go through it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first verse is, dig if you will the picture of you and I engaged in a kiss. The sweat of your body covers me. Can you, my darling? Can you picture this? Okay, so right off the bat, you know, the dig if you will the picture. That line in and of itself is a line that people just know because, well, first of all, it kicks off one of his most well-known songs, so people just kind of gravitate towards the first line of any song, like Dearly Beloved, or, you know, I never meant to cause you any sorrow. But dig if you will the picture is a line that people know, and this whole first verse is it's a very sensual, you know, it paints a very sensual picture in my mind.
Right.
What else do you get from that besides a lot of real sensuality and kind of general sexiness, like trying to speak here?
Yeah, I think one thing that always interests me about Prince as a lyricist, and you can see this all the way to his very early work. Although I think he obviously, I think he matured and got better as he went. But this is something that existed even, you know, way back with his first album. you never forget that the perspective, the persona that the lyrics are coming from. You never forget that this is a person in a body. You know what I mean? Like the body is very important. It's not just. I mean, here he literally says, the sweat of your body covers me. It's like there's this physicality that you're always very conscious of in a Prince song. I think a lot of artists are kind of sexy in a way that, maybe is sort of euphemistic, or, in a way that maybe doesn't feel carnal in the sense that, Prince's music is very much of the body, about what bodies do, the kind of mechanics of sexuality, not even in a pornographic, like, dehumanizing way, but when he paints a picture of sex, it feels sort of physiologically real in a way that I think a lot of pop lyrics don't, and a lot of R&B lyrics don't.
Well, for sure you do. And what he's trying to do right off the bat, because he says, dig if you will the picture. So he wants to paint a picture, right? Because that's what he's trying to do in this. He's letting us know right off the bat that he's intending to paint a picture with his words. And so he could say, you and I engaged in a kiss and having sex, but a better way of saying that maybe, and a little more, like I said, sensual, but also paints a picture in a different way that really gives you a sense of not just that two people are having sex, but in what position, right? Because
right.
The sweat of your body covers me, that means that they're very close. You're not just kissing fully clothed necessarily, or having a peck on the cheek. This is full carnality, two people naked, sweaty, having sex. And how else would the sweat of one's body cover you if they weren't completely, their bodies were touching? I mean, that is exactly what the only way that would happen. And instead of saying our bodies are touching, he's just saying the sweat of your body covers me, which tells us and the listener the exact same thing. It provides the same output, which is you get a mental image of what's going on, but done in a more poetic way, and just a better way of doing it, which is what a good lyricist is meant to do, is conveying something that everybody sings about, sex,
right?
But doing it in a way that you've never really heard before.
Right.
And so he's asking his darling, can you picture this? So I'm getting from this, it's like either I don't know. I mean, when I think of this, is he saying this as somebody who is wanting this person to imagine what it would be like to have sex with him? Or is this something like he's trying to remind her of what it was like when they have sex? I don't know if that makes a difference in how it's interpreted, but I don't really know the answer to that question. I always just kind of wondered what he means by that.
Yeah, well, it's in this, the tense of these lyrics is this kind of, I'm not enough of a grammar nerd to be able to tell you like what exact, but it's like a hypothetical. We don't know if this happened or is going to happen or is currently happening. It's this sort of, it could be any of these things. It could be all of these things. It's interesting. And that also feels very Prince, is sort of like leaving these kinds of things open. It's very open to interpretation. I would also say, just, this is sort of a general comment about the lyrical tone of the song overall, but you can see it right from the beginning here. This is a very romantic song in the like capital R. There's this sort of floweriness to the language. He doesn't just say we're kissing, engaged in a kiss, which is not how not how people non-Prince people talk.
Let's engage in a kiss.
It's this very, it's almost to the point of parody, but I think one of the strengths of Prince as a lyricist is he knows exactly how over the top to be. And this is a time when he's basically dressing like Lord Byron. He's wearing the frilly shirts, and he's got the curls, and I think I mentioned like the new romantic movement as a kind of touch point for this era of Prince. You can tell that he's playing with that kind of iconography, and it's this this is like it's Wuthering Heights. This is like romantic, capital R, romantic literature. And you can feel that's a major sort of part of his sensibility at this point in time. You can even hear you can hear it in the way that he gives it in this he sings it in this sort of affected kind of like mid-Atlantic accent that he puts on a lot around this era. This is, I think, very emblematic of that period. And they sort of visually portray it in the video. You just hearing this first verse, you can see that that purple room filled with dry ice smoke and doves flying around, and he's in the bath. Like it's such it creates this visual image that is like sexy and like almost silly. It's like right on the edge of being ridiculous, but he pulls it off.
Yeah, the video, it's funny you mentioned the video, because I do have notes about this, because how can you talk about When Doves Cry without mentioning the video? But the video does something that I always felt was like, at the time it wasn't a big deal because I didn't know what to expect. But nowadays when I watch it, they have a lot of the video, especially at the very beginning. It seems to have a lot of takes that just linger. Like there's not a lot of like cuts. It's like a long take of Prince just staring at you as the doves fly away, and then you just see him. He's just left there in the bathtub, and then he crawls out, and it's just one like really slow, long take of him crawling towards you, and then there's like this long scene where it shows him kissing Apollonia from the film, and it's like normally nowadays, or at least in the past, I don't know, 20 some years, the intent of videos is to just throw a lot of images at you and a lot of different things, and little really quick cuts and moving on from one scene to the next, to the next. But this video moves very slowly,
right,
and deliberately, and all those are parts of almost like how the song goes too, because the song starts kind of slowly and deliberately with this after the opening, and the way he sings these lyrics, as you mentioned, is in its affected tone, and it just kind of all melts together into this perfect package where you've got these lyrics that are being sung slowly as Prince is crawling slowly, and then you have this slow dissolve to this scene of him kissing Apollonia as he's talking about, sweat of your body covers me and heat between me and you. I mean, like, it's very sexy video.
Right.
And I've watched this video with my kids. I was very young when I saw this video. It's just because of the age I was at, and it was all over TV. But now I watch it and I'm like, it's a little awkward for me. And it's just a normal video. It's not like it's, an NC-17 straight to, YouTube video that somebody.
Right. Yeah, it's not just
all over.
love. Right.
This was all over MTV in 1984. And even now I look at it and I'm like, wow, this was a very erotic video. And they did everything they could do to make it that way with this images on the screen at the same time he's singing about the sweat of your body covers me. And in second verse, dream if you can a courtyard, an ocean of violets in bloom. Animals strike curious poses. They feel the heat between me and you. So that's another really sensual verse when it, once again, you have a very romantic approach, dream if you can a courtyard of oceans and of violets in bloom, and then talking about animals. But then at the end, it's really all about sex, and really about the connection between two people, feeling the heat between me and you. And so these first two verses do a lot of the same type of things in my mind. Do you feel the same way about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is just sort of like continuing to, it's almost like, if you think of this in terms of a movie, which is appropriate since this was written for a movie. It's like we start on this tight shot of these, lovers intertwined, and now we're sort of like, zooming out, and you see the setting, and it is, of course, because this is Prince in 1984. It is this borderline ridiculous setting. Like they're in some kind of courtyard surrounded by animals. It's both easy to picture and difficult to picture.
Yeah, much so.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting. There's also a line in I always think about the line "Animals strike curious poses," and a line in Raspberry Beret, "The horses wonder who you are." There's this interesting theme of Prince at this point in his career where he's thinking about animals watching him have sex a lot. Like I don't know where that comes from, but it is this odd recurring theme in his lyrics at this time.
I made the same note in my notes about the Raspberry Beret line, so we were both on the same page there. Like, what is up with that?
Right. It's a highly specific theme to have in your lyrics, but it's one that shows up at this point in Prince's career.
Yeah, those were more specific horses. Here, it's just animals.
Right. Right. It could be elephants. It could be tigers.
Yeah, who knows?
Rabbits. Yeah, squirrels. Like
it's almost it comes across more like this. I don't know, like this dreamland.
Right.
Ocean.
I picture deer for some reason. I don't know why, but I specifically picture deer like stopping, like deer do, and just freezing and watching. But I actually never thought about what animals I picture, but it's deer apparently. So.
For whatever reason, I never really had a picture of what I imagined which animals. Deer makes sense because they're everywhere, and the chances of deer wandering into your ocean of violets seems more likely than other mammals that don't even exist on this this hemisphere. So
right.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me as well. But of course, ocean of violets, he had to pick violet. If he's going to pick a flower that's going to cover the courtyard, it's going to be violets because we're in the purple era. And then a curious pose, animals strike curious poses. I just love that line. I mean, for no other reason, just because it sounds cool, and it really has an intriguing way of just kind of describing that look when animals notice you and they're looking at you like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. I don't know if I'm supposed to just sit here and not move, or if they make a move toward me, I'm gone. But if they just stay still, I will continue on my way. And you see that, when you encounter wildlife. Every once in a while, I don't encounter wildlife that much anymore, but when I lived in more rural settings, every once in a while I would encounter a deer in the wild, and to your point, they just like, what? Okay, what do I do?
Yeah.
And they give you that weird look. Okay, so then after the second verse, we finally get the chorus, and it is, how can you just leave me standing, alone in a world that's so cold? Maybe I'm just too demanding. Maybe I'm just like my father, too bold. Maybe you're just like my mother. She's never satisfied. Why do we scream at each other? This is what it sounds like when doves cry. Okay, so the chorus that everybody seems to kind of know by heart.
Right.
In spite of the fact that it's a pretty long chorus. I mean, there's several lines in this. Other songs that are iconic from this album, the chorus to Purple Rain is basically Purple Rain repeated over and over.
Yeah.
But you've got a very elaborate chorus here with multiple lines saying multiple different things, going different directions, asking questions. Who's to really blame for the way he is? Who's to blame for the way they are together? Is it nature or nurture? That kind of thing. So the chorus for you, Zach, what are some of the talking points you wanted to bring up with the chorus?
Well, I think for one thing, like what you were just saying, these are like deep existential questions to be asking in a song that is supposed to be, on and was on like top 40 radio. Like it's interesting to think about it like that, because I mean, this is a familiar scenario for a Prince song in particular, and for a pop song in general. Why do you just leave me standing alone? I feel like second only to the love song is the breakup song, in terms of stature and ubiquity in pop music. So that's all like, okay, that's what we've got so far. But then it's like it becomes this this like therapy session. Like he's talking about, where does this come from? Is it my parents? Like, why do we do this? It's going on this deeper level, which I think is interesting. And I also think one of the reasons why this song is so sort of universal, we've moved from this very, again, romantic, like flowery, this kind of fanciful verses, to now this chorus that I think is, while it's deeper than we're usually familiar with, and sort of like more introspective and more almost like Freudian, it's something that I think everybody can kind of relate to. It's this interesting balance of highly specific, he's speaking from the perspective of a character who is also basically him, but the traits of his parents that he's talking about are vague enough that I think we can all find something to identify with. And I think that might be one of the reasons why, despite being this kind of like longer, wordier chorus, it resonates with people. Because who hasn't at some point in their life thought, like, why am I so fucked up? Is it my parents' fault?
Right.
Like, I think that's pretty universal. So
Yeah, the song has like a very emo chorus to it.
yeah.
Isn't it? Is it kind of emo to me? Like this could have been sung by like some, I don't know, screamo band in the early 2000s, and you could see them jamming on their guitars and screaming these lines. Maybe it's just too demanding. And it's just because it's like, it's one of those things where, as humans move from teenage years to adulthood, and they start to examine themselves a little bit more, examine their own failings, then you start to think back to like, what's my problem? Why am I the way I am? And is it my parents' fault? I don't know. Let's explore that. Let's ask these questions, because we're all products of our own environment, and sometimes those environments involve messed up home lives. And in the vision that we get from the film is the kid came from a messed up home life, because Prince was asked to write this song for the film. So it's not like he had this vision for this song, as far as we know. Granted, who knows? He could have had it in his head years before, but all we can tell is that he was asked to write this song for this film. So he likely was thinking about how it's going to fit in with the film. And so lines like, maybe I'm just like my father, too bold. So in the film, his father is, you could call him bold because he's abusive, has a failed career that he blames on his family or his wife. And mother, like, she's never satisfied. We don't really get and the film doesn't do a good job of really kind of fleshing her out much. I don't feel. I feel like her character is underwritten and doesn't have much to do other than just get beat on.
Yeah.
But, that one could say, like, in the kid's father's eyes, she was never satisfied. Well, maybe she's never satisfied because he was failed musician. He couldn't help provide for the family. But, one could come across as that being like, okay, well, you never really accepted me for who I was, and, didn't ever accept the fact that I was a musician that couldn't make it. And there's some potential parallels to Prince's real life with that as well, from what we know about his real parents. And why do we scream at each other? Of course, the video hammers this home by showing scenes of, the couple scenes where of Prince's, I keep saying Prince, the kid's dad hitting his mom, and Prince breaking up that scene. And so the chorus very well fits into the film, but you can also look at it a little bit, and people tend to, I think, look at it a little bit autobiographical as well, even if that's not really accurate. I think also one thing I wanted to point out is the first two verses are very sexy, very romantic. They paint a really clear picture of what we're supposed to see of the two people in love or lust, however you want to describe it. But then the chorus takes this really kind of emotional, dark turn and turns the song into a much more emotional and darker place than the first two verses would indicate.
Yeah.
And then this is what it sounds like when doves cry is another line, very iconic line from the song where you kind of feel like, okay, so what is he trying to say here? And I think that when anybody's trying to dissect lyrics to the song, this is the line that most people are just going to try to wrap their heads around, I feel like, because it's obviously a metaphor, right? I mean, doves don't cry, so we have to kind of try to figure out what is he trying to say with that. So I have some thoughts on that, but I'm gonna let you go first with that one, Zach. This is what it sounds like when doves cry.
It is odd, and then of course it bridges right into the keyboard hook, which is also sort of interesting because it's not a very mournful sound. The song itself, the arrangement it doesn't sound sad necessarily. It doesn't even, it's sort of bright, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. So it's like we have this use of this, this like floating subject, but we don't really know what this is, Is it the screaming? Is it the screaming at each other? Is it the sound of the song itself? Is it something else? It is a very, I don't really know what to make of that line. It's strange.
It is strange. And so we know that doves are symbols of peace. So I think I'm not going to say that this is what I thought of when I was much younger. I didn't.
Right.
But thinking of it now as an adult and also somebody who has a lyrics podcast, it's like, okay, I gotta kind of figure some things out. And so what are some potential ways that one could interpret doves crying? So if doves are a symbol of peace and they're crying, maybe that tells the listener that there's violence or, there's crying because there's no peace. Like in a peaceful scenario, the doves are representative of that. So if they're crying, maybe that means that peace has been broken. Why do we scream at each other? How can you leave me standing alone in a world so cold? Father's demanding and bold. Mother's never satisfied. These are all kind of, I would say, negative things, negative thoughts.
Right.
And so then to end all of these lines about negativity and dissatisfaction with crying doves is like the breaking of the peace. And the other thing, and we'll get this on the third verse, but maybe I'll just save it because the third verse kind of gives me a little bit of another clue, but it can be used for so many things when doves cry, because also the film, the kid and Apollonia have been fighting, of course, because they spend half the movie fighting. Yeah. and he's kind of upset with her for choosing Morris, but he's also thinking about his parents and the fight that they just had and all of the bad feelings that he's dealing with and just angst over that. And so, I mean, it could be a metaphor for, two lovers fighting, like the kid and Apollonia in the film.
Mm-hmm.
It's just another way to kind of describe any kind of trauma or any kind of disagreement, fighting, just negative emotions in general is kind of where I go with this one. And the fact that he, as you mentioned, follows up, this is what it sounds like when doves cry, you kind of get the impression like right after he says that, he's going to show us what it sounds like when doves cry musically.
Right.
And it's hard to really, so you're expecting something, but all you get is dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I wasn't expecting that. And I think that I remember very distinctly as a kid, everybody really kind of being confused by that because I was expecting something else. I don't know what I was expecting, like a really cool keyboard line or something that was somewhat mimicking an animal sounds with, Prince's voice combined with a guitar or keyboard or synthesizer. But you don't. You get something really simple and understated. So then we move on to the third verse. Touch, if you will, my stomach. Feel how it trembles inside. You've got the butterflies all tied up. Go make me chase you. Even doves have pride. Okay. Third verse. Now, we still get a little bit of sensuality when he says, touch, if you will, my stomach. That implies that there's, touching going on. I get imagery of a woman tentatively touching his stomach because he asks her to, not necessarily because it's, part of their foreplay or whatever. It's like, I want you to touch me in this place. I need you to, I'm giving you a very specific location on my body. I want you to touch me. And I just have this image of her very tentatively doing that because, well, maybe it's because it came after the chorus where we know that there's been some fighting. We know there's been some screaming at each other. And then for him to ask her to touch him is maybe a little different question than it would have been if we were just leading up to this with like this very romantic and we kept going down that path of sensual and romantic. But now we know that there's a problem between the lovers of the song. You definitely get, I don't know, I get this like real tentative approach towards touch. Something like you don't really want to do, but you really need to. He's asking you to, but you don't really want to.
Right. Yeah. And then he's trembling, which is, again, we're back to this like very overwrought, romantic kind of, it's like high drama in these very small, physical responses.
Mm-hmm. So the part of this verse that lends itself to a different take on the song is that last line, or like the last two lines. Don't make me chase you, even doves have pride. To have a line that says even doves have pride, when he's saying don't make me chase you, even doves have pride, so that tells me that he's saying I don't want to chase you because I have pride. And my pride is telling me maybe I should not go after you because, I don't know, the problems we're having, I feel like are mutual problems. Why should I be the one to try to fix things when we're both having problems? I mean, should it be like you come after me and my pride is telling me let her come to me and see if she wants to fix things or wants to reconcile? And the fact that he's saying even doves have pride almost tells me, like, are humans doves? Is this just a metaphor that people are doves in this song?
Right. Yeah, it wasn't clear, I think, up until this point. I mean, we could have maybe, because he said this is what it sounds like when doves cry, and he was describing, these conflicts and arguments and, screaming at each other. Like, we could have made the leap that he's one of the doves, Yeah. But it isn't until this point where it's sort of like now he's making it clear that when he says when this is what it sounds like when doves cry, he's referring to the people that he's talking about. And then you also have, it's sort of interesting. You have this sort of cross song continuity where in I Would Die for You, he refers to himself as a dove, so it is sort of,
that's right.
You're kind of encouraged to make the connection between those two songs also. So then you have now it has a religious underpinning to it, because obviously doves are very symbolically significant in Christianity. And, I Would Die for You is very much about that. So it's now this symbolism has gotten sort of even more rich at this point in the song.
Yeah. I didn't think of it that way before, but you're right that there is that line in I Would Die for You. And we know Prince had a very strong connection with doves. I mean, he always had doves at Paisley Park. Right. So this aspect, this symbolism used in this era didn't go away once he was kind of done with the Purple Rain era and kind of done with this album cycle and the touring cycle. He was so quick to move on to different ideas, but Doves stayed with him forever.
Right.
So, I don't think it's just because this song was really popular and he wanted to make sure that he was always intertwined with Doves because of the popularity of this song. I think it meant something to him in a deeper way that Doves might mean to most people. And yeah, the spiritual side, the fact that they represent peace, all these things could be reasons why he was so drawn to Doves in general, and then to use them as the subject of this song to kind of, as we are coming to grips with, representing humanity, representing people themselves, and just using doves as symbolism for people. Instead of saying this is what it sounds like when I cry, or this is what it sounds like when we cry, I'm going to use doves, and it's going to make the song that much more memorable to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, after the chorus, we get another round of choruses, and I'm trying to think how the song normally fades out. The cursed 7-inch radio edit. You skip a lot of the really kind of cool musical portions of the song. It even starts to fade out during the guitar solo, which is crazy. Like, who fades out during a guitar solo?
Right, yeah.
This song does, because it's not a super long song. It's like under 6 minutes, but it's well over 5 if you play it from beginning to end, and that's just too long for pop radio. So right. I get what they needed to do, and what do you cut? I mean, you cut a verse or something to make sure you get that guitar solo. So, fading out the guitar solo is what it is, but nobody, unless, they have no choice, would probably listen to the truncated radio edit over the full album version. But I really like, even towards the end, like that really, I don't know, it's kind of like a more classical sounding keyboard sounds that are being played towards the end. I really get into that, and it's just another way, as we talked about at the very, very beginning of this episode, how there's so many different parts of this song that are added together to make this one composition, because that sound towards the end of the song sounds nothing like really what we had been listening to up to the beginning. At the very beginning's guitar solo sounds nothing like what we got throughout most of the song, and it's like I don't know, like this really elaborate puzzle that somebody's putting together, and they're taking elements from different musical styles to create this one song, and it's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And I just love the way it ends.
Yeah, it's such a like you said, it comes out of nowhere, but it also meshes so well with the tone of the song. It's this very, these like Baroque sounding strings. You can definitely imagine that, like, this is the same guy who says engaged in a kiss. It feels very like almost excessive in the same way that some of the lyrics do, and in a way that I think really complement each other. Yeah, this feels very much like Prince as a student of the 60s. I think especially starting with Around the World in a Day, the influence of groups like the Beatles would be a lot more obvious. But this reminds me of like the piano solo at the end of In My Life by the Beatles. It sounds almost like a harpsichord. It's like this kind of using classical music, using Baroque music as this way to sort of like elevate pop that feels very 1960s to me. And I think this is a period when Prince was kind of looking to 60s pop artists as a way to create something different, play with different sounds, and sort of expand his range. This is something that he would kind of make his own, and like later he'd involve Claire Fisher and have real strings, and then on Lovesick he'd go back to the fake strings, and it becomes part of Prince's overall palette of different musical styles and sounds that he would employ. But at this point, it feels to me like a specific nod to 60s psychedelic pop.
For sure. There's sounds from like Sgt. Pepper's album that you can also kind of say are influence this sound at the end of One Does Cry, something like being for the benefit of Mr. Kite or something like that. I can hear bits of like the musicality of that song as this song ends as well. So I totally get that. The actual last lyrics of the song that we get are Prince repeating, "Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry." And so now with him saying "don't cry," I guess you kind of it maybe gives it a little more optimistic tone, or maybe not. Maybe it's just more sadness. I don't know. I mean, if you're telling somebody don't cry, that leads me to believe that they don't want to see that person sad. You know, they want them to be happy, or, you know, they're there. You know, somebody's patting you on the back. Don't cry. They're there. So I don't know. I don't know what I get from that besides just Prince saying he doesn't want to see any more crying. You know, the problems that are occurring in the movie and through the song. He's tired of it. You know, he just doesn't want any more sadness. Do you get anything beyond that from this ending? Don't cry.
No, I don't think. But yeah, I think that's an interesting point. You know, don't cry is sort of something that could be it could be soothing or it could be a dismissal. You know, it's this like it's ambiguous. You know, in a way that I think a lot of Prince's music is, and I mean.
Like this whole song, you mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's it's emblematic of, you know, his general approach to emotions. You know, this is someone that could be extremely revealing of his like inner thoughts, while at the same time being, you know, deliberately unclear about what he means. You know, it's sort of that in a nutshell. You know, Prince was both somebody who really kind of poured his heart out in music and was also very, you know, deliberately unrevealing. So that simple expression, "Don't cry," kind of like it embodies both of those things. It's both like self-soothing and also, you know, you have to get rid of your emotions. You know, you have to hide your emotions.
Yeah. You know, the tone is everything when you say lines like that.
Right.
And he's almost saying like, "Don't cry." So he wants that person. It's almost like a plea. It feels like a plea in many ways. So I get it less dismissal than it is like a plea for them to really like reconcile, or I'm just tired of this. Let's stop this hurting each other. We got to stop.
Right.
And it's killing me to see you crying like this. So please stop crying. Don't cry. One other thing before we end, and I don't know, I don't like reading too much into Prince's lyrics and saying, you know, his real life framing some of his lyrics, but it's impossible to get around entirely, I think.
Right.
But one thing about the lines in the chorus, "How can you just leave me standing alone in a world that's so cold?" I wrote down just like, is this Prince channeling his inner child about, you know, feeling abandonment from his parents? Those of us who have read his biographies and know where, you know, how he kind of bounced around from house to house growing up when he was a teenager, and his dad taking him in for a while and his mom remarrying him, and he didn't get along with his stepfather, and maybe he felt a little bit of, you know, maybe not literal abandonment because he had a place to live when he wanted it, but he just never really felt like either parent wanted him that much, maybe. And so he kind of felt abandoned. I thought I would bring it up just because I know that some people probably look at those lines and think of his home life and his teenage years growing up and potentially feeling like he was abandoned by his mom or his dad, and really kind of pushing those feelings to the forefront. Like I said, like his inner child coming out and asking these questions about his youth and maybe some of the pain that it caused him. Have you ever thought of that as well? Just curious.
I mean, definitely. Like, like you, I'm always, you want to like try and leave space. Like I'm always a little hesitant to interpret, in general. Because I always like leaving that space for other possibilities. And, I think, as critics, we're kind of taught to like try and not treat everything as autobiographical. I think music especially, it lends itself so much to most songs are in the first person. Mm-hmm. It's a very like intimate form, but I also think that I don't want to keep myself from ever allowing for something to be autobiographical. I think Prince was, the more and especially the more we learn, the more we hear about his life, he did express, feelings about himself and his relationships, and he was a lot more kind of hard on his sleeve than I think we were led to believe. While he was here making music, there's a lot more autobiography in this music than I think he wanted to admit. So there's definitely an element of that. I think it's interesting, abandonment is such a theme through all of his music. It's one of the like singular themes that he comes back to again and again all through his career. And even in his autobiography that came out late last year, he told the editor and co-writer that the story of his parents, like trying to figure out how his parents shaped him is the like, it's one of the biggest like mysteries and sort of conflicts of his life. Like I don't have the book in front of me. I don't have the specific quote, but that's the gist of what he said, that this is like, this is one of the things that has kind of driven him his whole life. And I think when he writes about his parents in the book, it's interesting because it's almost like he got as close as he was ever going to get with When Doves Cry, with this very simple, maybe I'm just like my father, maybe I'm just like my mother. He uses more words in The Beautiful Ones, the autobiography, but he doesn't really get closer to the heart of it. And I think, part of that is because these questions, can't be answered. And I think it's hard to get there. It's hard to go deeper with these kinds of questions. And I think something was holding him back from digging any deeper. And this is kind of, this is as right there in front of everyone in 1984. He basically got as close as he was going to get to figuring it out. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, I just wonder, like, some of the things, like, maybe I'm just too demanding or too bold. I wonder if those were things that he had heard other people say about him.
Right.
Because we know from people speaking about working with him, other musicians, people that knew him at this time of his life, knew he could be a very demanding person when it came to creating music and making music and performing music. I don't think that's any secret, right? So it could be like some self-reflection going on here, even though this is in the context of a film when he plays somebody who is also demanding and
right.
A little bit cold and never satisfied. But Purple Rain is not an autobiography, but there's certainly aspects of it that aren't that far from the likely real truth that one can't say, like, maybe this is stuff that he already knew about himself. It wouldn't be such a stretch for me to think that maybe this is something he's thinking about himself as he's writing this.
Right. Yeah, I think, this is obviously speculation on my part, but I think for someone like Prince, who was in his non-artistic life, was not very forthcoming about his emotions. I think this movie that was like sort of autobiographical, but mostly not, sort of freed him up to do some some soul searching, and he had this he had this ability, he was able to kind of to say, well, this is about the character, and he was able to kind of use that as a shield almost, and then do some real, Computer Blue is pretty cutting. He's kind of going pretty deep on a few songs on this album. Oh, yeah. And I think there's an element where having it like, oh, it's about the movie, gives him some plausible deniability. Mm-hmm. I think there was something about one of the last interviews he gave, he was responding to this idea of like, everybody thinks The Beautiful Ones is about Susanna Melvoin, and he's saying, well, it's not, but he also doesn't say it's about vanity. He's like, I wrote it for the movie. It's about the character. And it's like, it's not about, okay.
We're all calling bullshit on that one.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it is, I do think that he was able to use the movie as a mask and really explore himself in a way that he hadn't as much.
Yeah, wow. So we're digging deep into psychology. It is a perfect way to do that for somebody who's really not comfortable exposing themselves, really, at least at that point in his career, and just exposing himself to millions and millions of people on that level, even though he was very comfortable exposing himself in other ways,
right?
Sexual side of himself, but then to get into like, I don't know, the yucky feelings deep down inside that, have been festering inside of him since he was much younger. It's therapeutic, but it's also very scary. And to have, like you said, have that shield and have that ability to hide behind a plot of a film to say like, this isn't really me singing about myself, or none of this is rooted in reality. This is all about the kid, and because I needed another song for the film, I wrote it about this relationship that he has with this woman and also his parents. End of story.
Right.
Don't think too deep into it. Don't overthink it. But that's what we're doing, because that's what I do on this show, is overthinking. And I thought I would be remiss to not mention the potential connections in the chorus to his home life in real life. So
right.
I thought I had to do it, because if I didn't, somebody was going to call me out for it.
Yeah.
And for good reason. Because it's there, whether we want to talk about it, or whether or not we have any right to talk about it, or to claim it is or isn't. We can at least bring it up and say, these are some ways people have interpreted this song over the years, especially as we've learned more and more about him.
Right.
We didn't know that much about him in 1984 by his choice, but it's 36 years later. We've learned a lot about him since then. So, all right. Well, that is the end of When Doves Cry. Zach, you have any other comments before we close it out?
Not really. I mean, this is a huge song. There's so much there. I think it's really only 3 verses and the chorus a couple times, but like, that's like saying it's just a keyboard and a guitar, and it's so much more than the sum of its parts in every way. So I'm sure that I'm going to hang up and be like, I wish I'd said, there's like something else. Like I had this other brilliant thought, that I think this is one of those songs like Little Red Corvette that I think was the last one that you and I talked about that is like this level of a masterpiece. It's one of those songs that we're going to be talking about for decades. It really is like, this is literature. This is art. And the fact that it was also such a huge commercial breakthrough makes it all the more impressive, I think.
Yeah, for sure. This could have been buried as an deep album cut, and it would still have the same impact in some ways, but it wouldn't in other ways, meaning like it wouldn't have had the cultural impact that it ended up having. And I'm just thankful that this was the lead song. I mean, Let's Go Crazy would have made much more sense to be
right,
the lead song from this album, because it kicks off the film, kicks off the album. It's very energetic. It's rock based, in a time when pop music was very rock based. So yeah, it would have made more sense, but no, they went with When Doves Cry, and in retrospect, it was a great choice. But I'm sure there was probably some concern from studio executives and record label executives, like, do we really want to lead with this song?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how wild is that paid off to the degree that it did?
Shouldn't have, but it did. Okay, Zach, so how can people reach you if they'd like to say hi and check out what you're doing?
Yeah, so I am also doing a track by track project related to Prince. It is I'm still stuck in 1999. I've been so kind of overwhelmed with my day job that I thought I'd be further along than I am. But it's a good time to jump on board, because the next post that I put out, which may be out by the time that this, let's be optimistic, maybe it's out by then. I'm almost done with it. It's been taking me forever, but I'm almost done. It's about the song 1999, and there's a lot to talk about there. It's going to be a very long post. So when that comes out, you can find it on the blog is called Dance Music Sex Romance. You can find it on princesongs.org. You can also follow me if you want to find out when it comes out. You can follow me on social media. I think basically on everything, Facebook and Twitter, the handle is DMSR blog. So now you can now there's a way to follow me without having to listen to my opinions about other things. So
all right. Well, I look forward to reading it when it comes out. Enjoy your writing. So thank you again for joining me, Zachary.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so this has been the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I've been your host, Jason Brenninger. And until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.